helter-skelter. I mean, it is basically the bedtime story America told itself.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is, a comforting lie.
We just swallowed this fairy tale about a mystical hippie cult so we wouldn't have to stare into the actual abyss. Because the alternative is state-sponsored psychological warfare.
Right. It's mafia blood debts.
Exactly. It's a catastrophic, rotting level of police corruption that goes so high it just bleeds straight into federal intelligence. So for this deep dive, we are going to systematically rip apart this 50-year-old myth.
We really need to deconstruct the summer of 1969, strip away all that, pop culture static.
Yeah, and show you the terrifying mechanical reality of what was actually operating in the shadows of Los Angeles.
You have to realize how much easier it is to just believe in monsters, to construct this mesmerizing guru with glowing eyes, twisting the minds of middle-class kids with Beatles lyrics.
It's cinematic.
Oh, totally. That is a narrative you could package. You could sell it to a panicked public. You can sell it to a jury, right?
And turn it into the best-selling true crime theater in American history.
Exactly. But when you spend years, decades even, obsessively pulling at the threads of that narrative, when you look at a 20-year investigative nightmare that destroyed livelihoods, triggered massive legal threats, forced people to live out of their cars just to find the truth, the monster vanishes.
The mystical guru Charles Manson just evaporates.
He really does. And what replaces him is a highly calculated, deeply protected criminal syndicate.
Let's ground this for you. I don't want to just list off the victims. You probably know who died. But put yourself in the physical atmosphere of late summer 1969 Los Angeles.
The heat, the tension.
Right. Over the course of 5 blistering weeks, there are 9 absolutely brutal murders. The defining moments, the ones burned into our cultural retina, are August 8th and 9th.
Cielo Drive?
Yeah, the slaughter of pregnant actress Sharon Tate, celebrity hairstylist Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, Wojciech Frykowski, and an 18-year-old kid named Stephen Parent, followed the very next night by the butchering of Leno and Rosemary LaBianca.
It was the sudden, violent death of the 1960s counterculture, just overnight.
It really was. Now, the official narrative, the one meticulously engineered by LA Deputy District Attorney Vincent Bugliosi, is that this was an apocalyptic race war triggered by the White Album.
A mystical prophecy.
Yeah.
Which is absurd.
It is. But before we even step foot onto Cielo Drive, before we analyze the blood spatter or the sheer overkill of it, we have to look at the man holding the leash. And, I mean, really look at his developmental timeline.
Charles Manson was not a philosopher. He had absolutely no esoteric awakening.
He was a barely literate, deeply psychopathic career criminal. I mean, look at his actual institutional history, not the Rolling Stone covers.
Yeah, the guy was a textbook predator.
His entire life was a masterclass in predatory survival and coercive control.
Let's trace the mechanics of that, actually, because you really need to understand how he built his methodology.
Yeah.
So 1951, he's in a minimum security honor camp, already exhibiting severe, unmanageable behavioral issues.
Just a completely broken kid.
Right. Then, 1955, he gets probation for vehicle theft, violates it almost instantly, and does 3 years at San Pedro. He literally could not function in civil society. It was just immediate, chronic recidivism.
And when he's out in 1958, he is not preaching peace and love in a park. He's pimping.
Yeah, he is actively operating in Southern California, exploiting a 16-year-old girl and a wealthy young woman.
This isn't a spiritual guru finding his flock. This is the foundation of a human trafficker. His core skill set was isolating and manipulating vulnerable women for absolute financial and physical control.
Yes, and it all culminates in a 1960 arrest on federal Mann Act charges, transporting women across state lines for prostitution. This is a crucial mechanical moment for understanding how Manson operated.
Because he escapes immediate, heavy prison time for one very specific reason.
Exactly. He manipulates one of his victims, a prostitute named Candy Stevens, to stand up in a federal courtroom and tearfully plead for his freedom.
He literally used the very people he terrorized as human shields. Wait, hold on. Just think about the psychological mechanics of that for a second. He's facing federal time, and he manages to psychologically break a woman he is actively exploiting to the point where she begs the judge to let her abuser go.
It is a sick, perfect microcosm of what he would do a decade later with the family.
It's the exact same blueprint.
So he eventually goes to McNeil Island Federal Penitentiary from 1961 to 1967. And inside, he isn't having spiritual epiphanies. He is honing this predatory craft.
You're right. He claims to be a Scientologist.
Yeah, absorbing their methods of auditing and psychological breakdown. He becomes obsessed with Beatles, sure, but as a mechanism of pop culture influence. not a religion.
The prison psychiatrists are noting these deep-seated, irreparable personality defects. He is institutionalized down to his marrow. And then March 1967 arrives. He is 32 years old. His sentence is up.
And he begs them to stay.
He literally pleads with federal prison officials not to release him.
He told them prison was his home. He had no identity, no survival mechanism outside of a cage.
But they release him anyway. He walks out McNeil Island and heads straight into the epicenter of the summer of love-hate Ashbury in San Francisco.
A 32-year-old, hardened, institutionalized pimp walking into a neighborhood completely flooded with teenage runaways on heavy psychedelics.
It's a hunting ground. He takes his background in coercive control, mixes it with a massive dose of LSD, and just starts building an operation.
And by 1968, they are operating out of the dilapidated Spawn movie ranch down in Southern California. I need to strip away the pop culture veneer of the hippie commune right now.
Oh, absolutely.
Spawn Ranch was a criminal syndicate. It was a cartel. They funded their existence through grand theft auto, dealing heavy narcotics, and forced prostitution of the women he collected.
But I want to pause here, because this is where the cognitive dissonance hits me hard. If he is this thoroughly documented, deeply institutionalized federal predator, how the hell does a 32-year-old ex-con walk into Haight-Ashbury, completely violate his federal parole in a dozen different highly visible ways, and instantly acquire a fiercely loyal, heavily armed militia without anyone pulling the plug?
Makes no sense on paper.
Right. He's crossing state lines, he's possessing firearms, he's involved with underage girls, and the system just looks the other way.
That is the essential question. The inexplicable immunity of Charles Manson.
We are going to get into the architecture of that immunity shortly, because it is honestly the darkest part of this entire reality.
But first, you have to understand the immediate panic of running an illicit drug ring under that kind of pressure.
Right.
Because that panic aids directly to the first drop of blood.
Right, because the violence didn't start as a mystical race war in August. It started in late July. It started as a violently botched, incredibly mundane drug burn.
Gary Hinman. The official story paints him as a peaceful music teacher living in Topanga Canyon. But when you dig into the local drug economy of 1969, Hinman was a part-time illicit drug manufacturer.
He was operating on the periphery of Manson's syndicate. He had money, he had cars, and he had product.
The mechanics of this are so gritty. Bobby Beausoleil, one of Manson's key followers, buys a large batch of mescaline from Hinman. Bobby then turns around and sells that product to a violent outlaw motorcycle gang, the Straight Satans.
And the bikers take the drugs, realize it's a bad batch, it's garbage, it just makes them sick, and they want their money back. Instantly, Bobby has a massive target on his back.
If he doesn't pay the bikers, they're going to kill him and likely come after the rest of the ranch.
It is a pure criminal debt collection crisis. So Bobby Beausoleil, Susan Atkins, and Mary Brunner go to Hinman's house to demand cash. Hinman refuses. He says he doesn't have the money.
So they hold him hostage. They torture this man for 3 days. 3 days of escalating claustrophobic panic in Topanga Canyon.
And then Manson arrives, and I want to emphasize this for you. He doesn't arrive with a peace sign or a cryptic Beatles lyric. He shows up with a sword and a 9mm Radom pistol.
He walks in, and he slashes Gary Hinman's face, slicing right through his cheek and nearly severing his left ear.
It is brutal, cartel-style violence. Manson leaves and gives Bobby the order to finish it. On July 27th, Bobby fatally stabs Hinman.
And then comes the staging. This is where the myth of the prophecy begins to crack wide open. After the murder, Bobby Beausoleil realizes he desperately needs to deflect the police investigation away from himself and the family.
So he takes Hinman's blood, draws a panther paw on the wall, and writes the words political piggy.
Why? Because he's desperately trying to frame the radical Black Panther Party.
Precisely. It was a panicked, crude, gangland frame job. It wasn't an esoteric awakening. It was messy. They were sloppy.
Incredibly sloppy. Bobby left a bloody fingerprint on the door frame. A 9mm bullet was just left sitting in plain sight under the sink.
And that sloppiness catches up to them immediately. Put yourself in that exact moment. It's August 6th, 1969. The California Highway Patrol spots a stolen Fiat parked on the side of the road. Inside, asleep, is Bobby Beausoleil.
The car belongs to the murdered Gary Hinman.
And sitting right there in the vehicle is the bloody murder weapon. Bobby is arrested on the spot.
This is the absolute linchpin of the whole goddamn nightmare. Bobby is in a cage. He knows Manson slashed Hinman. He knows Manson was in that house.
The clock is now ticking on the entire criminal enterprise at Spawn Ranch.
Bobby is facing the gas chamber. Is he going to talk? Is he going to flip on Manson? The police are going to descend on the ranch at any moment.
It's an existential crisis. The entire cartel is about to be dismantled. And 48 hours later, the Cielo Drive massacre happens.
When you view the events of August 8th and 9th, not through the lens of Bugliosi's Beatles-inspired apocalypse, but through the lens of a panicked, cornered criminal syndicate, the actual motives emerge. And they are terrifyingly rational.
Let's look at the physical crime scenes, the actual gore, because the physical reality completely destroys the cult sacrifice narrative. August 8th, 150 Cielo Drive. Manson doesn't even go.
Right. He stays back.
He orders his primary enforcer, Charles Tex Watson, along with Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian, to the estate. His explicit orders are to kill everyone in that house as gruesomely as you can.
The mechanics of the breach are completely tactical. They cut the phone lines. They encounter an 18-year-old kid, Stephen Parent, in the driveway. He's just visiting the caretaker.
And Tex Watson shoots him 4 times at point-blank range simply to eliminate a witness. Then they enter the house.
The violence inside, it isn't ritualistic. It is frenzied overkill. The victims are shot and stabbed a total of 102 times.
Wojciech Frykowski fought back viciously. He actually managed to get out the front door before Watson caught him. Frykowski was stabbed 51 times, shot twice, and bludgeoned 13 times over the head with the butt of a revolver.
Sharon Tate is stabbed 16 times while begging for the life of her unborn baby. Susan Atkins coldly tells her, "I have no mercy for you," and then uses Tate's blood to write the word pig on the front door.
The next night, August 9th, Manson is furious. He's furious about how sloppy they were, how much noise they made. So he goes with them to Waverly Drive, the home of Lino and Rosemary LaBianca.
Manson personally enters the home first. He ties the couple up, he robs them, and then he leaves. He goes back to the car and orders Watson and the women to go in and execute them.
Lino LaBianca is stabbed 26 times. A carving fork is left protruding from his neck. The word war is carved into his abdomen.
Rosemary is stabbed 41 times. And on the walls, written in their blood, "Rise, death to pigs," and a misspelled helter-skelter.
Vincent Bugliosi took that misspelled phrase on a refrigerator and built an absolute empire out of it. He stood in front of a jury and argued that Charles Manson genuinely believed the Beatles' White Album was a coded prophecy.
That these murders were designed to ignite a global race war, where Black Americans would rise up, destroy the white establishment, realize they were incapable of governing, and then turn to Manson, who would be hiding in a bottomless pit in the desert, to emerge and rule the world.
It is deeply fundamentally absurd. But it worked. It secured the convictions because it was sensational. It gave the public a bogeyman.
But see, the race war theory completely disintegrates the second you look at the alternative motives. Motives that make actual gritty sense for a 1969 drug syndicate.
Starting with the most obvious, the get Bobby out theory.
The copycat theory. Remember the timeline we just laid out? Bobby Beausoleil was arrested on August 6th for the Hinman murder. The family was terrified he would implicate Manson.
So on August 8th and 9th, they staged the Tate and LaBianca murders to perfectly mirror the Hinman crime scene. They wrote pig and death to pigs in blood to match the political piggy left at Hinman's house.
The psychological objective was brutally simple. Convince the police that the real killer was still out there and that they had the wrong man in custody.
If the exact same bloody MO happens while Bobby is locked in a cell, he has to be innocent. It's crude, but it's logical for a cornered rat.
Exactly. And this isn't just speculation. Multiple participating family members, Atkins, Krenwinkel, Leslie Van Houten, later affirmed in various capacities that this was the primary driving catalyst.
Even Bugliosi's own co-prosecutor, Aaron Stovitz, stated on the record his absolute belief that these were copycat murders designed to save Bobby Beausoleil.
But there's a second layer here, a darker, actively suppressed motive that explains why these specific people were targeted at Cielo Drive, the drug underworld.
This is huge. The victims were not just random, unfortunate Hollywood elites. They were deeply embedded in high-stakes narcotic distribution rings.
This changes the entire complexion of the case. Let's look at Jay Sebring. The public knew him as a revolutionary celebrity hairstylist. Yeah. But in elite underground circles, his nickname was the Candyman.
He procured and distributed high-grade cocaine and psychedelics to the Hollywood elite, and his enterprise was heavily backed by organized crime. Specifically, a mobster named Gino Massaro.
When you spend years digging into Gino Massaro's network, you find a guy named Joel Rostow. Rostow was an underling, a delivery boy for the mob.
And investigative records, actively suppressed reports, indicate that Joel Rostow delivered a massive quantity of mescaline and cocaine to Sebring and Frykowski at the Tate residence mere hours before the slaughter.
Mere hours. And Wojciech Frykowski himself was deeply integrated into dangerous criminal elements in the Los Angeles drug trade. He was attempting to muscle in on the local MDMA and cocaine distribution. He was stepping on toes. Heavy toes.
And on the other side of this transaction, you have Tex Watson, the primary killer. Watson wasn't a brainwashed zombie acting on hypnotic triggers. He was a known active drug dealer who routinely ripped off suppliers to fund the Spawn Ranch operation.
There is highly credible testimony from Sebring's own protege that the Cielo Drive murders were a direct, violent response to a drug deal gone bad the day prior.
A deal where Manson went to the house, attempted to sell a large quantity of drugs, and was physically beaten up and humiliated by Sebring and Frykowski.
Now look at the sheer violence inflicted on Frykowski again. 51 stab wounds, 13 blunt force blows to the skull. He was chased out of the house and butchered on the lawn.
That is not an esoteric cult ritual. That mirrors cartel retribution. That is a message.
And the postscript to this is chilling. It proves we are dealing with organized crime. In the months leading up to the Manson trial, several of Jay Sebring's criminal associates were systematically murdered.
Remember Joel Rostow, the guy who delivered the coke hours before the murders? His decomposing body was found stuffed in the trunk of a rental car at JFK Airport in New York months later.
They were cleaning house. The mob was tying up loose ends. And law enforcement completely ignored these mob ties. They actively suppressed them because introducing organized crime and massive narcotic syndicates would utterly ruin the simplicity of the helter-skelter narrative.
You also have the Terry Melcher retaliation motive. Melcher was a prominent music producer who previously rented the Thunier & 50 Cielo Drive house. He had rejected Manson's record deal.
But it goes deeper than a record deal. Melcher had hosted these dark, drug-fueled orgies. They called themselves the Golden Penetrators, where Manson supplied underage runaway girls from the ranch in exchange for industry favors and recording time.
Manson knew that house intimately. He knew the layout. He knew what happened there. Sending his death squad to that specific address was a violent, unmistakable message to the Hollywood elite who used him for his girls and his drugs and then just tossed him aside.
And if there is any lingering doubt that Spawn Ranch was an organized crime syndicate, look at the murder of Donald Shorty Shea just days after the Tate LaBianca murders.
Shorty Shea was a stuntman and a ranch hand at Spawn. Manson despised him for a few reasons, largely rooted in visceral racism because Shea was married to a black woman. But more importantly, Manson believed Shea was a police informant attempting to get the ranch raided.
So what do? They brutally murder him, dismember his body into pieces, and bury him in a dry riverbed.
That is mafia behavior. You don't dismember an informant because of a Beatles song.
So the obvious question, the one that should keep anyone up at night when looking at this case, is why? Why did law enforcement turn a blind eye to the drug running, the auto theft, the runaway girls?
How did Charles Manson have such inexplicable ironclad immunity while he was building this cartel?
Because to look closely at Charles Manson in 1969 is to stumble into a federal tripwire.
It's like finding a serial arsonist operating with total unquestioned immunity out of the exact same basement where the CIA is secretly testing psychological flamethrowers. You don't write that off as a coincidence.
This is where we cross the Rubicon from local police corruption into macro-level state intelligence. When you meticulously trace the footprints, the real investigative footprints, you uncover staggering, undeniable intersections between Manson and the CIA.
Specifically tied to two heavily classified programs, Project Uncultura and Operation CASS. And at the absolute center of this nexus is a man named Dr. Louis Jolyon West, Jolly West.
If there is a true villain operating in the shadows of the 20th century, it is Jolly West. He was a prominent psychiatrist, the head of the psychiatry department at UCLA eventually. But more importantly, he was a long-time, heavily funded CIA contractor.
His absolute specialty, coercive persuasion, brainwashing, and the weaponization of hallucinogens.
His resume is a chronicle of psychological horrors. During the Korean War, he extensively studied American POWs to understand the precise mechanisms of brainwashing. He wanted to know exactly how their captors use sleep deprivation, sensory isolation, and psychological torture to break their wills and force false confessions.
And the CIA saw his research and recruited him directly into MKultra. Now, the mandate of MKultra wasn't just observation, it was offensive.
They wanted to identify drugs and psychological procedures that could break a subject's free will, extract confessions, and essentially program subservient amnesiac assassins, the Manchurian Candidate Protocol.
Dr. West ran MKultra Sub-Project 35. He used hypnosis, massive doses of LSD, and severe sensory deprivation on people the CIA explicitly described as those who could not fight back. We are talking about military personnel, prisoners, and psychiatric patients.
Break down the Jimmy Shaver case for them, because this shows exactly how dangerous West's methodology was in practice.
Right, so in 1954, an airman named Jimmy Shaver was accused of murder. He maintained his innocence. Dr. West was brought in. West used highly sophisticated hypnosis combined with sodium pentothal truth serum to extract confession from Shaver.
Shaver's defense argued his mind was completely manipulated, that the confession was implanted.
It didn't matter. Jimmy Shaver was executed by the state based almost entirely on West's drug-induced psychological evaluation.
Years later, West gained notoriety for killing a massive bull elephant named Tusco by injecting it with 1,400 times the normal human dosage of LSD just to see what would happen. The animal seized and died almost instantly.
This man was operating with zero ethical constraints and infinite federal funding. And here is where the timeline becomes impossible to ignore. In 1967, at the exact moment Charles Manson is released from federal prison and heads to San Francisco, Dr. Jolly West relocates his entire operation to the Haight-Ashbury district.
West sets up what he calls a crash pad, a fake hippie safe house designed to lure in runaway youths, the exact same demographic Manson is preying upon.
West's objective was to study the effects of LSD and mind control in a real-world, uncontrolled setting. He was literally the only scientist in America at the time publicly predicting the emergence of violent LSD cults.
And it gets worse. The Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic opens that exact same summer. It's run by a man named Dr. David E. Smith.
Charles Manson and his female followers are constantly at this clinic getting treated for STDs. They are regulars. And Dr. David Smith explicitly permits Jolly West to use the clinic's patient base to recruit subjects for his CIA mind control experiments.
Furthermore, David Smith's own research at the clinic is being covertly funded by the CIA through various front organizations like the NIMH.
Now, I need you to prepare yourself for the mathematical impossibility that completely shatters the official narrative. Manson's federal parole officer, the man responsible for keeping him out of prison, was a man named Roger Smith.
Roger Smith?
Roger Smith was a criminology doctoral student, and he was working directly out of that exact same free medical clinic.
He was conducting federally funded research alongside David Smith and Jolly West. The man holding Charles Manson's leash was operating out of a CIA-funded sociological laboratory.
Stop and think about that. Roger Smith systematically ignored flagrant, highly documented parole violations. Manson is crossing state lines, possessing heavy weaponry, committing statutory rape, dosing minors with LSD, and Roger Smith grants him absolute, inexplicable immunity from reincarceration for 2 years.
He doesn't just look the other way. He actively protects Manson's operation.
The environment Manson ultimately created at Spawn Ranch, the severe sleep deprivation, the geographic isolation, the relentless forced LSD dosing, the systematic destruction of the individual ego to create absolute obedience, these are the exact protocols Jolly West was developing for MKultra.
It raises the most chilling hypothesis of the entire era. Was Charles Manson observed, cultivated, or actively utilized as a field asset by federal intelligence agencies to study the sociological engineering of violence?
If he was a psychological weapon built in a petri dish in Haight-Ashbury, what was the target?
The target was the entire counterculture.
Operation CAOS.
From 1967 to 1974, the CIA ran Operation CAOS. It was a massive, highly illegal domestic espionage program designed to surveil, infiltrate, and completely destroy the anti-war left and civil rights groups.
The federal establishment was terrified of the youth movement. They viewed it as an existential threat to the state.
And think about the PR victory the Manson murders handed to the state on a silver platter. The sheer horrific optics of it. Unwashed, acid-dropping hippies flashing peace signs while butchering pregnant women in Bel Air.
It dealt a fatal, irrecoverable blow to the peace movement. It equated anti-war sentiment, the whole free love ideology, with satanic, unpredictable violence.
The Manson murders literally spelled the end of the 60s. If the state wanted to turn middle America violently against the counterculture, Charles Manson was the most effective weapon they ever deployed.
And because of that immense political utility, the micro-level cover-up had to be vicious. The narrative had to be protected at all costs.
Vincent Bugliosi didn't just present a flawed narrative, he enforced it with staggering prosecutorial misconduct. Witnesses who could point to the drug connections, the mob ties, or the intelligence overlaps were systematically manipulated, intimidated, or suppressed.
And when you get too close to this is what happens. When this 20-year investigative nightmare began exposing these discrepancies, when journalists started finding the documents, the establishment retaliated with overwhelming force.
Bugliosi threatened a $100 million defamation lawsuit against anyone publishing the truth. He used his deep law enforcement contacts to harass investigators.
He tried to smear people with the most vile accusations imaginable, calling journalists gay pedophiles just to destroy their credibility and make them toxic.
The financial and legal pressure was designed to be ruinous. Publishers canceling book contracts out of fear, suing authors for the return of massive advances, forcing investigators to drive for Uber and face eviction just to survive and finish writing the truth.
It was a scorched earth campaign by the Los Angeles legal apparatus to maintain a highly curated, legally fragile version of history.
And the suppression wasn't just in the courtroom, it was interagency. You had this catastrophic communication failure between the LAPD, who had jurisdiction over the Tate murders, and the LA County Sheriff's Department, who handled Hinman and LaBianca.
Detectives arrogantly refused to link the scenes despite identical bloody writings on the walls costing crucial months. But you can write that off as bureaucratic incompetence. What happened with the Watson tapes, that is act of malice.
Let's examine the mechanics of the Watson tapes, because this is where the cover-up becomes undeniable. In November 1969, Tex Watson flees and is arrested in Texas.
His defense attorney, Bill Boyd, records over 20 hours of Watson giving a candid, completely unprotected confession.
Watson details the 102 stab wounds, yes, but he explicitly describes other undiscovered murders committed by the family that law enforcement completely missed or ignored.
For decades, these tapes were locked in a safe, protected by attorney-client privilege.
But then the attorney dies. And in 2013, we are decades removed from the Summer of Love. This is modern history.
Yeah.
The LAPD engages in an unprecedented, highly aggressive legal battle.
They bypass standard jurisdictional protocols to seize these specific tapes from a Texas bankruptcy court. The LAPD detective finally gets his hands on the tapes, turns to the district attorney, and literally says, "Don't jinx it."
And the second they have them in their possession in California, they seal them. They actively suppress the contents. They refuse to disclose information about unsolved murders, actively denying closure to the victims' families who have been waiting for 50 years.
You have to ask yourself, it is 2013. Why is the Los Angeles Police Department fighting a shadow war in a Texas bankruptcy court to bury the audio of a serial killer from 1969?
What is on those tapes that still, half a century later, threatens the establishment? Does it explicitly name the drug suppliers? Does it detail the intelligence connections? The narrative protection is absolute.
And if you defied that narrative back during the actual trial, you didn't just get sued, you disappeared. Look at what happened to Ronald Hughes.
Ronald Hughes was the defense attorney for Leslie Van Houten. And unlike the other defense attorneys, who were largely capitulating to the circus, Hughes fiercely opposed Charles Manson's attempts to control the legal strategy.
He actively, aggressively prevented Van Houten from taking the stand to perjure herself and absolve Manson. He drew a line in the sand in open court.
November 27, 1970. It's the Thanksgiving recess. Hughes goes camping in a remote, rugged area near Sespe Hot Springs. A massive flash flood hits, miring his car deep in the mud.
The two teenagers he's with decide to hike out to safety, but Hughes stays behind with the vehicle, and he vanishes.
Throughout the rest of the trial, Manson family members are sitting in the courtroom, violently taunting the judge, outright implying in open court that they had done away with Hughes.
On March 29, 1971, the exact day the jury returned death penalty verdicts for the defendants, Ronald Hughes' severely decomposed body is discovered wedged between two massive boulders in a gorge.
The official cause of death was ruled undetermined due to the state of decomposition. But among legal scholars, defense attorneys, and investigators, it is widely, almost universally accepted that Hughes was murdered by unincarcerated members of the family as direct retaliation for defying Manson's control.
It's a message. You do not step out of line, the system won't protect you, and the cartel will kill you.
And speaking of stepping out of line, we cannot ignore the ideological cross-pollination that was happening in San Francisco during Manson's formation. The family didn't exist in a vacuum.
There were other fringe, highly dangerous ideologies operating in the exact same geographic and psychological space. Specifically, a group called the Process Church of the Final Judgment.
The Process Church was founded in London by former Scientologists, and they set up a major chapter in San Francisco in 1967, operating just blocks away from where Manson was recruiting.
Their theology was a deeply esoteric, apocalyptic synthesis. They worshipped a union of Jehovah, Lucifer, Satan, and Christ. They distributed high-end magazines on the streets with titles like Fear and Humanity is the Devil.
The theological similarities to Manson's apocalyptic ramblings were striking and heavily documented.
And once again, the censorship machinery rears its head. When the poet and investigative journalist Ed Sanders wrote his seminal 1971 book, The Family, he included a massive, heavily researched chapter detailing Manson's direct connections and overlaps with the Process Church.
The cult immediately filed aggressive libel lawsuits against the publisher. And what happened? The American publisher, terrified of financial ruin, caved.
They excised the entire chapter from all future U.S. printings. They literally censored the investigation to protect themselves.
And in a display of sheer, bizarre arrogance, the Process Church later published an exclusive, in-depth prison interview with Charles Manson in their own proprietary magazine, asking him for his extreme philosophical comments on mortality and violence.
As the years went on, the cult underwent internal schisms. They systematically scrubbed their satanic imagery, went through a series of complex corporate transmutations, moved to Utah, and ultimately rebranded.
And what did they rebrand into? I need you to brace yourself for this. They transitioned into a highly lucrative, universally beloved, mainstream animal rescue charity called Best Friends Animal Society.
You cannot make this up. The institutional protection, the weird, dark permutations of these fringe groups, it's maddening.
The judicial aftermath is just as maddening, and it shows the long tail of this structural failure. On April 19, 1971, Manson and his followers are sentenced to death in the gas chamber.
But then, in 1972, the California Supreme Court issues a landmark ruling in People v. Anderson, striking down the death penalty as unconstitutional.
And because California didn't have a life without parole statute on the books at that specific time, their sentences were automatically commuted to life with the possibility of parole.
Which resulted in a 50-year legal nightmare. 50 years of traumatizing, highly publicized parole hearings where the victims' families have to drag themselves before a board and beg the state not to let these monsters out.
Susan Atkins died of terminal brain cancer in prison in 2009. Manson died of cardiac arrest in 2017. But the system is shifting. Leslie Van Houten, after dozens of denials, was paroled and released in 2023 at the age of 73.
Patricia Krenwinkel, who is 77, has recently been recommended for parole, citing her advanced age and spotless institutional record. The legacy of that 1972 judicial loophole is still agonizingly present for the families.
Before Manson died, in 1997, he underwent his final comprehensive psychological evaluation at Corcoran State Prison. The results were highly classified until after his death.
The public still thought he was a schizophrenic madman hearing Beatles songs. But when you look at the actual clinical data, the Rorschach tests, the MMPI-2, the psychopathy checklist, it shatters the Bugliosi illusion entirely.
The clinical findings explicitly, categorically ruled out schizophrenia or formal thought disorders. He wasn't broken by hallucinations. He didn't hear secret coded messages in the White Album.
The tests revealed an individual with severe manic tendencies, profound, deeply rooted psychopathy, and an off-the-charts grandiose sense of self. His reality testing wasn't fractured. He knew exactly what he was doing.
He didn't break from reality. He weaponized it. He constructed a cult of personality, using federal mind control techniques to execute highly specific criminal directives.
And the justice system used his feigned madness as a convenient shield to hide their own sins.
The 1969 Manson murders are not a story about a hallucinogenic guru. They are a blood-soaked cipher. When you decode it, you find the darkest intersections of American culture. Volatile drug burns, organized crime, and a systemic, festering rot within federal intelligence that remains violently kept from the public.
We bought a bedtime story, but I want you to stop and think about the sheer weight of the institutional machinery required to protect this single narrative for over half a century. If the state is willing to let a predator operate with absolute impunity, if they are willing to let citizens be slaughtered in their homes and then spend 50 years bankrupting, threatening, and crushing anyone who simply asks why, it forces you to look at every other closed case in American history. What else are they keeping on the shelf? What other monsters were quietly built in federal petri dishes, just waiting for the right moment to be let off the leash?